This is Ellis Cerrone reporting for James Cole. My first question to you is were you always the kind of person to seek out challenges? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Yes, I think I always have sought out challenges. I think my reason for doing it has completely inverted. So maybe without realizing it, from a very young age, I had a lot of insecurity. Um, I had the privilege of being raised in a very sort of high octane, high performance environment. Lots of intelligent, capable people. The parents of all of my friends worked fancy, important jobs or, commuted to New York City. I went to a private school. And so I think I always felt like I wasn't enough. And somehow my way of dealing with that, instead of shying away, which is I think what would be most intuitive, like being scared or lacking confidence, I wanted to prove to myself. I almost think of it like Uber ratings. Like the more I could get, the more times I could prove to other people or prove to myself that I was enough and I can do it. I was trying to convince myself, I think, that I was enough, that I was good enough, that I was to be respected or something. And I never really got there. I spent my teens and 20s like just, whether it was my dating life or my athletic life or my professional life or my school life, in all of those arenas, I would always push myself as hard as I could, just because I fundamentally believed that I was worthless. And I wanted to get that taste out of my mouth by trying to prove to the person sitting across from me that I was worth something. And it's only been very recently that I've sort of reframed, and I challenge myself to be, I think because I fundamentally love myself and think that I have worth, and I want to get better in those ways. So it's more of an exciting additive process as opposed to um, frantically trying to prove something.
Was there a moment in which the shift happened for you? How did it occur?
Maybe not a moment, but a period of time for sure. I think, we've talked about my depression, and I think you can only sustain a level of self-hatred and self-frustration for so long. Um, so for me, it just sort of, over the past year or two, like between entrepreneurship and a serious relationship and a move across the country and some, big stressful things in my life, I think it just became too much. Like me putting so much pressure on myself instead of starting every day with the assumption I'm losing, people don't like me, I'm not good enough, and trying to, as hard as I could every day, chip away at proving that wrong, waking up the next morning and starting from zero. Like that's sort of how I was living my life for the past 10 years. And I think it just sort of reached, I had like my only, I have what's called dysthymia, which is sort of low grade, constant depression. Um, Mostly when people think of depression, they think of MDD, major depressive disorder, which is you're mostly fine and then you have a very serious trough for 2 weeks to 2 months, and then you're mostly fine. And you might have one or two of those a year, sort of forever, those troughs. And I had my one and only MDD episode last summer, so 15 months ago, where I could barely get out of bed for 2 or 3 weeks. And I think that was sort of the beginning of the end for me. That's when I really like started making big changes in my life.
How do you define challenge in your life right now? And what do those challenges look like to you right now?
I think I'm trying to figure that out. The past couple weeks living here in my shipping container in North Carolina, I've I have all these goals. I have them as stickies on my bathroom window, and I have a big calendar on my wall, a whiteboard calendar that I write goals on. So I'm trying to get in physical shape, and I'm trying to read more, and I'm trying to meditate, and I'm trying to uh, hit goals at work, and I've I'm trying to, yeah, all sorts of things, like trying to hit goals across all arenas of my life. And I think I went too wide and just found that my whole day was spoken for. Like I was going from thing to thing. I was finishing a work thing, going on a walk and listening to an audiobook, getting back and doing some push-ups, then going for a run, then coming back and doing more work. And I was finding myself in this self-hating mode again, where no matter how hard I tried, I'd end every day having not accomplished something or feeling not so great about my effort on a given task. So I've sort of pulled back. I just got a puppy and she's taking up a lot of my time, and I'm trying to focus more on her than so much on myself. So I challenge myself in just about every way, and I'm sort of finding a balance of how much challenge is enough and how much is too much. Ella, can I read you a quote?
Hmm.
Um, so there's a famous entrepreneur who unfortunately just tragically died in a fire. Um, and I actually hadn't heard of him prior to his death, but um, he was an early investor in and then became the CEO of Zappos and did a number of other really impressive things. How can I find this? One second. So this was sort of brought out upon his death as like one of his seminal quotes. Happiness is really just about four things: perceived control, perceived progress, connectedness, that is the number and depth of your relationships, and vision slash meaning, being a part of something bigger than yourself. And I really thought that was beautiful and describes for me what happiness is about so much. And something that we focus on a lot in this conversation is, um, at least for me, perceived progress, moving along a continuum, picking a point on the horizon line and charting a path towards it. It was once explained to me that depression is the absence of a future. And when I've been really depressed, that couldn't be more true. You just sort of feel like nothing in this world is worth living for. I don't mean that I'm suicidal per se, but I'm not remotely excited about anything beyond 2 inches in front of my face. Everything's lost its color. And if you can breathe life as hard as it is when you're in that state back into a future, when you can get excited about something that's ahead of you and chase it, life becomes worth living again. So I think challenging myself is also a coping mechanism, which is to say, setting a goal of like, hey, in 8 weeks, I'll be able to run a mile this fast, or in 8 weeks, I'll have hit this goal at work, or I'll have finished this book, or I'll have hung out with this friend, you know, that goal, and then reverse engineering the path towards it is a way of creating a roadmap to progress. And as per this gentleman, progress is one of the big pillars of happiness, perceived progress, feeling like you're moving along a continuum.
I also wanted to talk about this idea that you're seeking out challenge specifically that hardens you. Can you talk a little bit about that and why?
Yeah, I think that's sort of just a truism or fact, right? All challenge hardens you. So um, like I've given this analogy to you before, but going to the gym and exercising a muscle really in any way, so long as you're somewhat exhausting the muscle, it will tear, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little bit, micro tears, and then it will repair itself and come back bigger so that it can beat whatever that was, that challenge. And that's how you can lift heavier and heavier weights. And it's the same thing with running faster and faster. You know, you condition your body to be able to handle the strain so that you can push yourself and actually handle a larger strain. And you keep ratcheting up like that. And the mind is the same, you know. By challenging yourself, you as a human being adapt. You learn how to either get better or handle not being good enough, or both. um, One of my favorite psychologists says that we don't get less afraid, we get braver. So if you're afraid of things in your life and you work on it, it's not that you're less afraid of them, it's just that you are more brave and can take on those challenges. So I believe that any challenge psychologically makes you a little bit stronger so that you can either take on that challenge and win, or take on a bigger challenge and lose, which in turn will make you stronger, and so on.
I also want to hold just for a beat on the use of the actual word, the fact that it hardens you, because as you've also said in your sessions, that you're a pretty empathetic and sensitive person. Do you ever worry that you're going to lose the sensitivity in the process of just becoming harder?
I think it's a totally fair concern. Like if I was an outsider looking at me, I would be concerned of that. Like there's something so deep within me. It's sort of like a don't forget where you came from thing. Like I don't say this as like a good thing necessarily, but I have one of the most active minds of anyone I know, right? It's often my demise and my greatest weakness, and sometimes it's a strength. But my mind moves very fast, and I'm always thinking and worrying and checking in and observing. And when you add that horsepower to a talk track that's basically you're not good enough, do more, take on a challenge, win, you're still not good enough, you're still not good enough, go to sleep, wake up, you're still not good enough for decades. Like that level of intensity with that talk track, like I was in the gutter of my emotional spectrum for a long, 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 long time. It's so rude. Like it's so real for me. It's like I can feel it, you know? So no, I mean, for me, it's like again, it's this whole egotistical utilitarian thing. Like to get harder, to improve, to sort of beat this demon, to beat this thing. Like already, I get immense satisfaction, hence doing this out of like trying to help, trying to like turn around, look behind at people that are on their journey and maybe haven't quite figured it out quite as much, and give them some advice as to like how I've started to make progress on my journey. Um, so no, I think like empathy and love of others and love of self and sensitivity, like these will always be my hallmark traits. So even though they feel a bit at odds and antagonistic, they, I think, complement each other.
You also mentioned that you're scaling back a little bit and readjusting your protocol right now. Do you ever worry that sometimes you just needlessly challenge yourself or you make the challenges too hard? And how do you kind of know when to recalibrate?
Yeah. I mean, you like think about a greyhound dog running around a track, and like there's the rabbit, right? And it's funny because I lived with runners who have all become professional runners now, and in professional running, there's something called a rabbit too, where you have someone who's very fast lead the race. They don't finish the race. They just set the pace so that everyone else can mindlessly chase. If the rabbit in either of those two scenarios gets out too far ahead, the dogs will lose interest or pace, or they might get distracted. If the rabbit's too slow, then the greyhound just catches the rabbit and it's over. So that you need the challenge to be just in front, you know, just enough that it's pulling the best out of you always. And if it's too far ahead, it can be demoralizing or you lose track of it. And if it's too easy, then you don't get a sense of accomplishment. And so I'm trying to find a balance of sort of being enough always and being not enough always, and living in that's a second paradox, right? So if softness, sensitivity, and hardness are at odds with each other, so too is being good enough, like loving yourself and just being like, hey, I'm great just the way I am, and being not good enough. So constantly being like, I could be better. I could take on this challenge and I might lose today. And my goal is to sort of live every day and a couple times be like, hey, I'm pretty great and I'm happy. Like I'm happy with where I am and who I am and what I'm doing, and I'm lucky to have the life I have and to be the person I am. I'm enough. But then I hope in that same day a couple times I say, wow, this is really hard, or I don't know if I'm going to be able to accomplish this, or this is going to take me 8 weeks, or you know, something like that, where I feel like greatness is being pulled out of me. And I think you need that tug of war.
I also wanted to talk very briefly about the fact that our generation historically is slated up against a lot of challenges that we didn't necessarily pick, whether it's student loan debt, whether it's the decimated job front, whatever the case may be. And yet we're often given or spoken about as if we are soft. And so I just wanted your take on our generation's challenges and where you see yourself within that frame, and any advice you have for your for other young people.
My answer to this is not a popular one, but I'll just tell the truth. I mean, I think that that's a tale as old as time, right? Like 20 generations ago, we would have died at age 48. We would have had to worry about cholera, or getting a flu, and that, like we have modern medicine. If we were born 2 generations ago, we'd be worried about getting drafted and going to Vietnam or going to World War II. There are like there are so many things that we have to grapple with that our parents or great grandparents or great great grandparents or what have you couldn't even possibly comprehend, like imminent damage from global warming in the next 50 years, um, you know, effects of technology on our psyche, and depression and anxiety being at an all-time high, student debt, um, you name it. Like there's so many problems that are unprecedented, or at least the worst they've ever been. But there are also so many things that are the best they've ever been. I'm not here to be the judge and jury and say that we have it easier or harder than another generation. I think it's hard to really put everything in the scale and make that assessment. But I think it's fair to say that like anyone living ever, everyone living today, and certainly everyone in the past has challenges. Like pick the richest, most successful, famous person. They have a lot of pain and suffering in their life. And pick someone who is destitute and disenfranchised and below the poverty line, and they certainly have a lot of pain and suffering in their life. Um, so we all have challenges. And then in some ways we all are blessed, just about everyone can find something in their life, a close relationship they have, or a cherished object that they have, or something about their personality that they love, that they can feel grateful for. So I think we all can chart a path from where we are and what we're grateful for to where we'd like to be. And no two journeys will be the same. There are, billionaires who have started 18 successful companies and, live in the Hollywood Hills. Their path from where they are to where they want to be will obviously be worlds apart from someone who makes $37,000 a year and lives in West Virginia in a double wide. But simply the act of loving an aspect of who you are and where you are, and charting a path to where you'd like to be, which is a little bit higher than where you are today, can make you happy, irrespective of where you're starting and ending. So I think it's a bit of a cop out to look at big macro trends and say, like, we have it so hard or we have it so much better. Our generation is accused of both.
As you're setting these goals for yourself, whether they're time goals or challenges at work to achieve a certain milestone, how do you process and cope with missing one of these goals or challenges?
I am not, I'm really good at setting goals, and I'm really good at putting a system in place to chip away at it for 1 to 4 weeks. Sometimes when a goal is 8, 12, 16 weeks away, like the Greyhound, it gets a little bit in front of me and I lose focus. So I'm not here to say that I'm like some hardened warrior that has it all figured out and hits every goal he sets and whatever. More often than not, I do not hit my goals. And I'm not embarrassed to say more often than not, I quit before it's over. It's not that I reach the end and I try to run a mile at a certain pace and I just miss it. More often than not, I stop training after 4 weeks because something else comes up. So sometimes I beat myself up for that. Like, why can't I see these things through a bit more? And sometimes I feel like the most important part of the process is seeing something in yourself that you love, seeing how you want to improve it, setting a goal, and starting to take the first couple steps along the path. Like that's the bulk of it. When you look at a fMRI, a real-time MRI of a concert pianist, if you have them close their eyes and pretend on just on a tabletop to play a concerto, and you scan their brain, and then you have them go and play in a concert venue on a piano, the brain actually lights up identically, which is to say the concert pianist envisioning and projecting herself playing gives her brain the same experience as when she's actually playing. So sometimes setting the goal, imagine yourself in a future state and starting the process, that's, that's more than half the battle, I think.
Yeah, I was about to say, it almost sounds like the goal isn't actually the goal for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a truism, right? Like it's the journey, not the destination. Like I think having the courage to admit that there's a way that you want to be better, setting a goal so that you can become better and starting to accomplish that goal. Ideally, yes, you do accomplish some, many, all of your goals. Not, maybe not all. Um, but I think it's okay if you don't. And I think starting is more important than finishing.
If you could give your younger self advice about challenges and challenging yourself, what would it be?
Probably just to invert sooner, I think I had it right. Like again, I've never been a passive person. I always run towards the fire. Like even when the odds are like I'm an entrepreneur now, right? Like I almost like it better when it's expected that I'm going to lose, cuz I think that gives me safety. Like I'm like, well, if I lose, like that was the expected outcome. It's much more stressful to me when I'm in a very easy situation and I could fail. Like that's 90, if I'm 95% expected to succeed and then I somehow fuck it up, that's really embarrassing. But if I'm 95% supposed to fail, if I fail, that's okay. And if I win, I somehow have surmounted the odds. Like it sets me up for a much more satisfying conclusion. Um, so I've always put myself in situations like that. And I think my advice to myself would just be try to reframe it where you're not starting with the assumption that you're worthless and then trying so desperately to prove otherwise. You're starting with the assumption that you're wonderful the way you are. You can always improve and to enjoy the process of trying to improve. And it's like it amounts to the same thing, but it's just like a 180 in terms of how you conceptualize the framework. So maybe to an outsider, like my day-to-day schedule looks similar, but how I'm conceptualizing that schedule and experiencing that schedule couldn't be more different.
You also said that while you're here in North Carolina, you're taking on a number of challenges. What's one of them, or one of challenge in your life right now that you're really excited about?
Um, there's an answer that doesn't involve me, so I'm not going to give it. Or it involves other people other than myself. I think the easy answer, maybe a bit cliche, is like really, really being isolated. Like I don't know anyone for 500 miles. You know, it's COVID, and even if it weren't, I don't know that I'd be like making friends here. Like I'm very much alone. Like I have not had a face-to-face conversation with someone other than saying thank you when I get a coffee or something, um, in a month, and I won't for a month. So I'm really just in it with myself. And I've had bouts of, pretty bad depression in the past couple weeks, more so than I've had looking back 6 months maybe. So just like putting some of these protocols, like putting my big mouth to the test. Like I talk a lot about this stuff and I still struggle with it, and learning to sit with it, learning to grapple with it, learning to work through, learning to self-soothe. Um, in New York, I can grab for a lot of things, whether it's, an amazing meal or a latte or, a hang out with a friend or, a $16 cocktail or any number of things that sort of scratch the itch a little bit. I don't really have a way of scratching it. So I'm learning here. So I'm learning just to sit a bit more.